Hello guys, this is my next video tutorial that I mentioned that I will be doing for another past paper 2 questions worksheet from the IGCSE computer science exams. And this one also we will be starting to look at the pre-release material and talking about the breakdown of this pre-release into the program, and I will be showing you a quick run of this program and how it will be like. I have made a slight modification to the pre-release material because I had to do that for my students. For my computer science students, I wanted them to use a function which I would also like to introduce you guys to. Perhaps you're not familiar with. It's actually a very useful function in programming called tabulate, and it's very useful when you want to create a table, which just makes your program very organized, especially where a table is needed, like this scenario that we're going to be looking at in this pre-release material. So let's get started, guys. So this is from the past paper to May-June 2018, and the pre-release says that there is a computer shop which will build a computer shop will build a computer from components to meet the customer's needs. And it says for each request for a computer to be built, an estimate of the cost is produced, and the component stock level is checked. If all the components are in stock, a firm order to build a computer can be placed. A program is required to work out the cost of the computer, update the stock levels, and provide a daily summary of the orders for the shop owner. Now, what they're asking you to do is to write and test a program or programs for the computer shop owner. Your program or programs must include appropriate prompts for the entry of data, error messages, and other output needed to be set out clearly and understandably. All variables, constants, and other identifiers must have meaningful names. You will also need to complete these 3 tasks, and each task must be fully tested. Task 1, it says you need to produce an estimate. Use the tabulate included in the link below to produce the table estimate given. And so there is, this is where I have added my extra own feature where I asked students to use the tabulate function to be able to create a table so you can display these components that are available from this computer shop for the users to see, the processor types, the prices, and so on, before they can start to demand or to order a particular component. So I just decided it will be better if it was using a tabulate function, or you could even use a format function if you guys know about that, how to format your text in programming, which again we might look at later on in our upcoming video tutorials, and that can format your text to look like a tabular form. So you have the component choices and prices in dollars. But if you guys want to know what tabulate form is, if I click on this link, you can also Google this link up, or you just check tabulate online. You can install the tabulate module in your Python if you're installed in your computer, or you could use this REPL8 website that I showed you guys last time, and it also has the built-in tabulate function. So this is the function that allows you to display information in sort of like a tabular form. So the first task, it says, write a program for task 1 to calculate the cost of building a computer using these components. And so these are the components that are given. The customer makes a choice for each component and an estimate is produced. The estimate must show a unique estimate number. So as with any time you go and buy electronics, what usually happens, of course, is that you have an estimate, right? They give you an estimate of what you bought, how much you bought, the unit price, the components, the total price, and etc. So that's pretty much what they want you to do here. Once a customer makes a choice for each component, and of course, checking that these components are actually in stock, which they don't really talk about in this scenario. If you've paid attention to, they don't really say what is the original stock number for each of these components, which means you have to devise the stock number for the sake of running and programming this whole algorithm. So they only tell you that the computer makes a choice for each component, and at the end of making a choice, because all these components are used to build the computer in the first place, so the end of making all these choices of these components, that the customer will now receive a unique estimate number, which your program should automatically produce. That will be unique. That means one customer would have a different estimate number from the other, and also the components chosen, that the components the customer has chosen should also be included in the estimate, as well as the price for each of those components. The estimate must also show the total cost of the computer, which is calculated as the sum of the cost of the components chosen plus a 20%. So you could say a 20% extra interest, so that would mean 20% of the total cost. Whatever you get as the total cost, then you add, whatever you get after the 20% of the total cost, then you add that to the total cost, which will give the final cost for the whole estimation. So this is what task 1 is asking you to do. Basically, the customer is supposed to make a choice, and an estimate is supposed to be produced, which is a unique estimate, and the components, which would show the components chosen and the price. And the estimate must also show the total cost of the computer, which is calculated as the sum of the cost of the components chosen plus 20%. So task 2 basically says place an order. So this task is asking you to use the estimate from task 1, check if the components are all in stock. If the components are all in stock, then you just basically update the components, the stock level, and add the unique estimate number to the list of order numbers and add the customer details and the today's date to the estimate details to finalize the order. And then you're going to print 2 copies, one for the customer and basically one for the shop. And then task 3 is basically summarizing the day's orders. And what this is going to do is that it's just going to check and see, it's going to provide an end of day summary that shows the number of orders that have been made and the total number of components that have been sold and the values of the orders. So this is like an estimate like for the shop assistant or shop owner, which basically shows the number of orders that have been made for each component, the total number of each component sold, and of course the values of the orders itself. So that means the values for the orders. So basically, if we look at task 1, so task 1, okay guys, so task 3, as I was mentioning, is to summarize the day's order, which means extend task 2 to provide an end of day summary showing the number of orders made. So that would mean the total number of each component should be sold, that was sold should be shown, and the value of the orders, that is the total value. So when you look at this program, what you understand is that for task 1, you're supposed to prepare an estimate. That's basically what it's asking you to do. And this estimate is supposed to have an estimate number, the components that the customer has successfully chosen if the order was successful, the price of each component, and the total price. So this is what task 1 is saying. Prepare an estimate. Now task 2 is extending from task 1. And it's just saying that in task 2, you should update the stock levels. Of course, when an order has been made, stock levels need to update. Obviously, that is something that happens even in reality. And you're supposed to add this estimate number to a list of order numbers. So you have to create a list called order numbers and basically add the estimate numbers. You're supposed to add customer details. Now, it's not exactly clear what they mean by customer details, whether they mean personal details as in customer name and etc., or they just mean customer details as in what they've bought, which I pretty much think that it has to do with the estimate details. So in the program I'm going to show you, it doesn't really have any customer details for name or any of that personal information. You can, however, add it in your program and then include that as customer details. But I just basically had the dates as required, today's date, and the estimate details. So for customer details, I would say that you should add some information that is personal, like customer name, date, customer name, gender, and perhaps anything else that you feel is necessary. And then you need to just basically duplicate 2 copies that print 2 copies of the same order. One would be for the customer, one would be for the shop. And that's what's happening in task 2. So task 2 is where you're printing the estimate that you have created in task 1. And you're basically printing 2 copies of that estimate that also contains the customer details and today's date, which is the additional information you need to add to that estimate. And you're printing 2 copies of it. And then task 3 is basically extending from task 2, and it's saying show like an end of day summary that shows all of the components, the number of orders that have been made, of course, for each of those components, the total number of orders the total number of each component that have been sold, and the value of the orders as well. So that's what we're going to be looking. So what they mean by value means the total value. So I have created this program just like I did last time. I'm just going to explain how the program works. So first of all, because they said we need to show the date, today's date, I use this date time module, which I import date from. So this is how you basically use date. If you want to show current date, like today's date, present date, and you want it to keep updating, you have to import date from date time. You guys already know from our previous video tutorial, I used the import time because I wanted to keep the program realistic. So the import time just basically means that it can flow in a very realistic manner. I also used the tabulate function that I was talking about, which is the one that I added as an extra to the scenario that was never given, but I just added it to create this table of component choices and prices. So that's why I imported tabulate from tabulate. So this is how you have to write it. Next, what I did was I created a one-dimensional array, or you could call a list for the different processors, the different RAMs, the storages, the screen sizes, the case types, and the USBs, because this will just be a list that will contain all of that information. And to be honest, it is not so necessary to have this. The reason I had this initially was because I never used the tabulate function in the first place. So I just displayed all of this information to the user. But this is not necessary because I use the tabulate function and I don't need to necessarily have them saved on one-dimensional arrays. I just kept them here so I can show you an alternative. If you don't want to do the tabulate, you can just create a one-dimensional array to store all of these different components, and so you print it back for the user to see. And now I created some sort of things like a variable called processor P3 count. Remember that in a typical stock or store, each of these components must have their own unique stock level number. So P3 would have its own P5. Even if it's the same, you have to store it separately because every component is different. So this is why I created something like processor P3 count, and I just set it to 3 initially just for testing purposes, but you can set it to any value of initial stock number since they didn't give you in the scenario. And so I did that for RAM as well, RAM 16 count, RAM 32 count, storage 1 terabyte, 2 terabyte, the screen size of 19 and 23 inches. So I just created unique variable counts to store their storage numbers initially because you will have to update those storage numbers whenever each component is being sold. Here is the processor. I also created a variable that will keep track of how many of each of these components are being sold. So I did for processor 3, P3, P5, and I set it to 0, and I did for RAM, I did for storage, screen, case type, and I did for USB as well. Then I had another variable that was estimate number, and I set it to 0. So this was going to create a unique estimate number which would update by 1 every time a customer buys something. So it's unique for every single customer. It does not repeat because it's going to be updating by 1. But you can decide how you want to create an estimate number. You can basically create an estimate number where you create some sort of thing like a list, guys. And inside of the list, like you give certain estimate numbers like that, maybe, for example, and you use a random function so that you can, make the computer randomly choose any of these numbers to assign to the user once they purchase anything. So you could do it that way if you prefer. I just prefer to do it this way where I just increase by 1 easily, and that will differentiate every customer uniquely. I also created something of final price. This was not asked in the scenario, but I created it just to store the prices of the orders that were made successfully for each customer so that at the end of the day, I could just sum up all of those prices and I could use to display the total values of the orders for task 3. And then the order numbers, as you guys remember from task 2, it says you should add the unique estimate number to the order numbers, and that's pretty much what I did here. I used the flag. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but flag is a variable that we either set to true or false, and it's just used to control the way things run in your program. For example, the flag will be true as long as the customer keeps placing orders and etc. successfully, but then the flag becomes false whenever the customer enters, for example, a large stock number that is not available in the stock, then it changes to false and it just ends and exits the program. So that's one way you could do it. You could do it using a while loop. You could do it using, most likely it's going to be a while loop here because you need to keep the program going until something changes, either until everything goes out of stock or one particular item goes out of stock and then you exit. So you can do it that way using any sort of method, but you need some sort of control. So I set this to true, and I said while the flag, which means while it is true, it will keep running to ask the customers for all of the components. It will only change to false if the customer enters something like an incorrect data, not even that, but if the customer enters an stock number of a particular component that is not available in stock. Now print, this message is going to print welcome to, so I just added this extra thing where it prints welcome to the Alanis computer store. I just put that as an extra information, and then 2 seconds after, which is the time.sleep, it's going to print. Now this is where I use the tabulate function. It's going to print the list of components that the customer can choose from, so it's going to print pretty much this table exactly in a table form using that tabulate, where you have to write when you import the tabulate, which is what you did at the beginning here. Then when you want to create a table, you first have to write the variable name, which I wrote as data is equal to 2 square brackets, and inside of the inner square bracket you write what exactly is going to be as parts of information, the information in your table, as in the rows, the number of, columns you're going to have. So I just have 3 columns, one for processor and one for the components and the prices. If you have more, you just keep adding more of the information. So the first thing you're going to write is the information, that is the records you're going to have in your table, not the name of the fields, the records inside of the table. So you write that out, and that's what I did for all of them, for RAM, for storage, and the ports, etc., etc., and you close that with the last square bracket. And then this one here is just printing a color. And so I wanted the table to be shown in a particular color. There is a website that I normally use with my students. It's called Liawi. I'm not sure if I can find Liawi. I'll try to find it and put it in the description box. It's a very good website for where you can get, I'm sorry about that, I need to find it. Just give me a minute, guys. I don't know. I used to save it on my computer, but I will try to find it. It's a website where you can get all of the information. No, I don't think it's here, guys. So I'm going to put it on the description, on my description for this video, where you can get color codes. It's a very cool website. You get color codes of different colors that you can use, and you basically can copy those colors and so guys, as I was saying, I paused the video so I could go find the website. So this is the Liawi website I was talking about, and the website has some very useful, Howie is a computer programmer, and I think he or she, I'm not exactly sure, posts some very useful information and features you can include in your code. I'll put the link in the description. And where I normally get the colors codes from is when you go to colors, you click on like 16 colors, you get the color code to change text into green or any other color, and etc. And there are other useful features for what you can include, like a navigation bar, a progress bar in your program, and etc. So this is where I got this particular color because I wanted a table to appear in this color. And so finally, to finish your tabulate, after you include all of this information of what's going to be inside of your table, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to print the tabulate, and you're going to be printing the title for your table. That is basically the component, the choices, and the price in dollars. So basically, you're going to be printing, the next part of the tabulate is just basically to put in what are going to be the titles that you would include in the table. So this is where you can put in the names of the fields or variables, and that's what you do here. So you put it inside of a print statement, so it prints the table out, and you write this keyword of tabulate, and then you open another bracket and write the data, which is the information that's going to be in the table or form. And then the headers, you notice that's the header of your table is what you have to include, what they will be, as many as they are, and you basically close the 2 brackets. Now getting into the program, remember that we had set flag to true. So while true, it's going to print, of course, in a particular color again, which I got again from the Liawi website. So it's going to print my text in that color. So what you have to do is just paste the color in speech quotes so that it actually does work and you don't have to do anything else. And it's going to print this title, which says, choose a processor of your choice from the stock list above, because the stock list is actually this table that we printed from initial stages. Then it's going to be asking the user for a processor choice. That means what processor would they like to choose, which starts with the first option. And then here basically checks to see if the processor choice that they have chosen is in processor. And of course, in processor, and this is the main reason why, again, I created this list, which I initially told you you don't need to, but it is also essential, which I forgot to mention, because if you don't create it, there's no way how you can validate. I mean, if you, it's not that there's no way, you could do it another way, but it's easier to validate making sure the user chooses any one of these options by just saying if it's in that list. So, or you could say if processor equal P3 and or processor equal P5 if you don't want to include that list method. So this is the validation, making sure that they've chosen a processor that is from the processor list. And this if statement checks to see if the processor choice that they've made is equal to P3, then it sets the processor price to $100, and then it prints the message saying that the price is $100. This is just an extra. And then it asks them how many of that type of processor would they like. And this if statement checks to see if the quantity they have entered is less than the initial stock number of that type of processor, which I set to 3. Of course, if it's less than that, then they can place an order, which then displays you can place an order. And then it basically subtracts that number from the processor count, which then updates the stock level. And then it also adds a +1. I mean, it also adds to the processor P3 sold, which is a variable we created to monitor the number of orders, number of items, components that were sold individually, in this case P3. So it's going to be adding the number of processor P3s that were required, that was initially entered by the user every time. So this updates the stock level. This one updates the component number sold level. And else, if they chose another, if this processor quantity that they've entered is actually greater than the number of stock of P3 processors, it's going to tell them you have entered a large number, and the flag turns to false, which was initially true. So it initially stops the program and it breaks out of the loop and ends. And then, guys, we come and pretty much the next thing also repeats itself. If they chose another type of processor, P5, it sets the processor price to $120 as we were given in our information on the table here. And then again, it basically repeats the whole process, and it tells them the price, it asks them for the quantity, it checks to see the quantity is less than the stock number, then they could place an order, it updates the stock number, it also updates the processor P5 number sold, and if not, if they've entered the number greater than the processor count, then it tells them they've entered a large value and it breaks, and it repeats this again for processor P7, and it does the same. And it also has, there's also an else here, and this else actually connects to, if I show you right up, it connects to this part of the if statement saying if initially they had entered a processor choice that was never inside of the processor list, then of course that means they've entered a wrong choice, and so it will print out this message saying incorrect choice, and the system will close in 5 seconds and they have to run all over again. Of course, you can make this into a function, so it repeats the whole thing as sort of like a menu kind of thing, or you could make it into a loop if you don't want it to just exit. And pretty much, guys, everything else is repeated. The same thing happens again for the next item, which must be on the same alignment. You notice that I'm asking them to choose the RAM once they finish making the choice for the processor. It's on the same alignment as the first if statement that was for where it asked them to enter the processor choice and if. So it's like on the same line. You have to be careful with that kind of thing. So when you're asking the next question, it should continue from there, which means once they finish choosing the processor, only then, after the validation and everything, only then could they choose the RAM. And again, the same thing, check that the RAM choice is in the RAM array. So the same thing like the processor, making sure they've chosen something from this list for validation. And then again, it repeats itself. If the RAM is equal to 16, it sets the RAM price to 75. And it also displays this telling them it's $75. And it pretty much repeats all over again. So I don't need to really explain that, except this part that I would like to explain, saying this part is very essential for task 3. The reason is because if the RAM, for example, they enter the RAM 16 gigabytes, quantity they entered is less than the RAM 16 stock number count, I mean it's greater than, then it will print that you've entered a large amount, and so that it doesn't update that as a stock, as the RAM 16 sold count, as in it doesn't update it as something sold, save it. We need to reset everything, the processor choice, if they had initially chosen as P3, we need to subtract that quantity because that means they've already entered a large amount for the RAM and maybe the system has, your program has accepted the processor choice they've made because it was in stock, but now they've come to the RAM 16 gigabytes, for example, and they've entered a large amount, larger than what is in stock. And so that has to end the program, but before it ends the program, telling them they've entered a large number, we have to reset the processor counts that already has been saved, the one that they've already saved, we have to reset it back to its original value. So we subtract the processor P3 quantity for this particular order, and then we subtract if it's processor 5, the processor 5 quantity, if it's processor 7, the processor 7 quantity, because they've only made a processor order before the RAM order, right? Because that's what was following. The processor is first and then the RAM. So if this was accepted, but now they've entered a larger value of 16 gigabyte RAM, then you have to reset all of the processor sold values by subtracting the quantity they've entered. So it does not add that value as part of sold, if you know what I mean. So that's what's happening here, and that's pretty much what happens to everything else. And then the flag goes to false and it breaks out of this loop. And so it goes for if it is 32 gigabytes, it repeats the whole process all over again. And then again, like I said, this is actually an else statement that traces up to if they have chosen something that is not in the RAM array. And again, guys, this repeats all over again for the storage capacity. So the next question after they finish asking, entering the values for the RAM choice, then the next thing is to enter the storage capacity, and it all goes again. So I don't think I need to repeat explaining this because the process is pretty much the same. Only here you notice that if they've entered a value that is greater than, for example, here it says this else is related to this if. If the storage 1 terabyte quantity they've entered is greater than the storage 1 terabyte count, then again, it's going to set everything back to its original value. That means the processor they've chosen, depending on what they've chosen, it will subtract the quantity they've entered so it does not add up to sold. And it does the same thing for RAM because that's the two choices made before storage. And it repeats this all over again, guys. It does this for, again, the other option of storage capacity, which is if 2 terabyte. It repeats the exact same thing, only with a slight difference in price. Then again, the next question that goes is the screen size. It checks to see the screen size, it checks the value, it repeats again the same thing, setting this time the processor to subtract quantity, the RAM and the storage because those are the choices made before screen size. And it repeats the same thing for the second choice of 23 inches, and it goes all the way again to the case typing. After the screen, of course, the next thing to ask is for the case. I hope you guys remember, after you ask the second option of the screen, you're asking them for the case type, and again, the same thing happens. You check and see if the case is in the case array. Your program basically is doing that and then assigning the right price to save it so that you can later on calculate the total price for task 2. And again, guys, the same thing. So if they enter a case, for example, for mini, each case type is done separately. If the mini quantity is greater than the mini count, which is a stock level, then of course it will say you have entered a large number and it resets everything again. So it doesn't add that sold for the previous components that were placed, because then remember what the scenario said. It says that they cannot place a firm order. They cannot place a firm order unless they have all components in stock. All components need to be in stock. And so that's why you have to reset all of the components by subtracting the quantity. Once it gets to a rock bottom, where they have entered a quantity that is larger than the stock number for a particular component, then all the previous components you need to subtract the quantities that they've entered or placed an order of, because the order goes back to 0. They can't place an order. And so this happens for the next option, MIDI tower, and then finally for the USB ports, again it checks to see, checks if it's less than, if it's greater than, it resets everything again without adding the stock value. And then finally, once this is all over, if you go back, remember task 2 extends from task 1, and this is where you have to print the customer details, today's date, and the estimate details, and have 2 copies, one for the customer, one for the shop. And if you guys noticed that I said I did not include anything about customer details like name and etc., which you can include. My own estimate for what I'm going to show you just has the today's date and the estimate details. But of course, you can include that extra detail. So at the end of all of these orders, it prints a message saying, thank you for your order. Your computer is ready to be built. And of course, it increments the estimate number because the order is successful. Once it's successfully validated all of that information I just showed you. So it increases the estimate number by 1, and it adds that to the order numbers, which exactly if you go to task 2, that is what it's asking you to do. It says add the unique estimate to the list of order numbers, which we created initially from the beginning, if you guys remember. Oops, sorry about that. If you go to the very top, you remember we created an order number list, okay? Now going back down to the very end, okay, that's where we are. So after doing that, then we have to find a total price, which again is part of task 2. So we have to add up all of the choices that, depending on what the user chose for processor price, RAM price. This is why we had standard variable names for each of these components. We added up, but we also have to do 20% of the total price, which I've done here, and add it to the total price value to find the final cost. If you remember, that was exactly what task 1 was asking you to do. And then that was extended for task 2. And so I added that final cost to an array that I created, if you guys remember, which I said was not required, but I created it to easily sum up the total price for task 3. So I added it with the append function to that array, and I put it in brackets as the name of the variable that was storing this total price after 20% in addition. And then, of course, I found the sum. Like I said, I created a variable and found the sum of that final price array that was storing all of the total prices for all of the orders. This will be helpful for task 3. Now for task 2, this is all you need to print: customer detail copy. So a copy containing the today's date, and you basically do today, you create a variable with the variable name, which obviously would make sense for today or today's date. And then you use the function date.today, which you already imported from datetime, if you remember. So that's going to work to show the date for today, and it will print today's date. You just call the variable today, or you could just print, date.today here actually if you don't want to use a variable. And then it just prints the details of the customer. So this is the customer copy. So like they said, the estimate number, the processor choice, the price of each of the components they've chosen, and of course the total price. And then there's 1 copy for the shop as well, so 2 copies. And finally, for task 3, which mentions you need to have an end of day summary, this is where I printed this whole end of day summary, but I just added an additional information, which you can do so your your program is logical, is to create some sort of shop ID, shop admin password. So no customer can just go and log in and get this information, only a shop administrator. So that's part of the validation. So this is for the end of day sales. I asked for your, if you were a shop administrator, if yes, then you need to enter a password, and I validated that. And then 2 seconds after, in a new line, I included a color so that everything comes in a color as well. And I just showed the end of day summary sales, which includes the estimate, the number of estimates that have been done, as they've mentioned, because it says show the number of orders made. That basically means the number of estimates you have. And then in a new line, I put a title, and then I did again a tabular form where I had the information for each component and how many were sold and the total price quantity, unit price for each of those components, which basically then fulfills this part. And then lastly, I had a part, this was the total price, by the way, guys, the total price for each component, which was 000, and of course, because total price would just be the total values that you have for those orders. So I just put 0 in there, and then finally in the last column would contain the final total, which, if you guys recall, the final total was finding the total sum of all of the prices for all of the orders made. So this is the final total of all orders. So this is the information that was going to be in my table. And of course, these are the headers that I had: component, the type, the unit price for the table, the number sold, and the total price in dollars. And then this else, of course, access denied is in case if the user does not enter the right password, access is going to be denied. And then finally, this last else will be, okay, have a great day, which basically traces up to the very beginning if statement that we have at the top here, which is this one right here. Okay, So guys, this is the end of this program, and this is pretty much how it is. I know it's lengthy, but we try to include everything that they asked you in the pre-release. It's very important. I hope you've learned how to create tabulate. I will now show you how this program does run so you can have an idea. So we'll run this program, and so it says, welcome to the alanines, and this is what I'm talking about, the tabulate. You see how it creates this table for component choices and prices, and now it says enter a processor choice. So I'm going to say maybe I want to buy P3. It says quantity. Remember, initially I set the quantity to 3. So let's say I want to buy 2 of this. RAM choice, I'm going to say, well, I want to buy 16 gigabytes. Let's say I want to buy 1 of this. This is again just testing purpose. Storage capacity, I want to buy 1 terabyte. I'm going to buy 2 of this. Screen size choice, I'm going to say 19 inches. And I'm going to buy perhaps 1 of this, or maybe, yeah, 1 of this. I'll buy 1. Case type, I'm going to say mini tower, and I'm going to say I want to buy 2 of this. And then USB ports, I'm going to use 2 USB ports. If you guys remember, it's available there, guys, at the top of the table. USB ports was between 2 or not. And then it just, it shows me my estimate value here. Oops, I think I need to run this again. I'm going to run it again, guys, because you guys didn't see. So I'll run it again because it just ends the program for me. So I'm going to run it one more time. So it's installing tabulate. Usually it does this on REPL, and now I think I can click the run. And there it is. So let's do it again. So P3, 2, 1 terabyte. Oops, not 1, 16 gigabytes. Let's say 1. Storage capacity 1 terabyte, I'm going to say 2. Screen size, I'm going to say 19 inches, and then I'm going to say 1. Case type, I'm going to say mini tower, I'm going to say 2. USB ports, I'm going to say 2 ports, I'm going to say 1. So it gives me my estimate. As you guys can see, the shop details, it prints twice because remember we have customer estimates, which basically contains the dates and the details, and then it has another copy for the shop estimate, so basically 2 copies, which I really don't know why they're asking for, because there should be some sort of validation. And then the next thing is we're going to again enter the an information. So I'll do like I'm placing another order, and then I'll show you when I place an order number that is more than the stock of a component, how the program, you know, pretty much validates and closes because I've put a number that is more than stock number. So I'm going to use P5 this time, and I will say I need 2. Remember, for each component, I set the stock numbers to 3. RAM, I'm going to use 16 gigabytes again. Initially, I had, just to show you that it works, initially I had 16 gigabytes and I requested for 1, so there's still 2 more left since I set it to 3. So if I put 2, it should, 2, it should work. So quantity is 2. So it does work because there are 3. It only has to be greater than 3, then it doesn't work for stock. Storage capacity, I put 1 terabyte. I could do 2 terabytes now instead and say 2. Screen size, I put 19. So according to the estimate that was produced here, this was for task 2. I will put screen size, perhaps I will put 23 this time, so 23 inches. And then I will request 1 of that. And then case type, I did mini tower. I will do midi tower. And then I'll request 2 of that. And then USB ports, I'm going to do 4 ports this time, and I'll request 2 of that. So this is just random for testing purposes. Now we get to, so this is an estimate that was produced again for the customer, and this time the P5 is there, and you see the estimate number increases by 2. This is the second estimate, and this is for the shop. Now I'm going to do again, let's say I will do P7 this time, and then I will say I need 2. But let's say I try to do 16 gigabytes of RAM again, and this time I try to enter a value like 2. It should no longer be in stock because I've already bought 3 that are set, so it should end here. So you see it does end. It says you have entered a large amount that we do not have in stock. And then finally it says for task 3, this is task 3 now, are you a shop administrator? If I say yes, it says enter the password. So the password we set was XXX. And it says access is granted, and it shows me the end of day sales. So you can see for processor P3, only 2 were sold. If you go to the top, you notice that processor P3, we only requested 2, so it counts only those 2. And then for processor P5, it says 2 were sold. So let's go back. So if you go back to processor P5, you notice that you requested 2, so 2 was recorded. Processor P7, it says 0 sold, even though it accepted it. So this was why we had that else statement, if you guys remembered, where I showed you it set everything to if P3, if processor choice equal P3, and it says processor sold equals to processor sold minus processor quantity. So it does not record this, even though it accepted it, it does not record it because the order was not successful in the first place. So it still keeps it to 0. And then the number of 16 gigabytes were sold was 3, which again, if you go back, you will see that we initially requested 2, we requested 1 here. So if you go here was 1. 2, and then if you go to the very beginning, we requested 1, so 2 plus 1, which made it 3 in total. And so it does that for all of the orders, and then it gives you the final price, the total price, which is $1,014, because it adds the total price that was gotten for this part of the order that was successful, 606 to the first one, $408. And so that's it, guys. That's the end of the program. And also it shows you that there have been only 2 orders made successfully. It does not count this last one because it was not successful. And that's it, guys. I hope this program has helped you. If you would like more into these past papers, just let me know, or anything else. And I will see you guys in our next video tutorial. Have a great day, everyone, and take care.